Hey guys, welcome back to Dream Analytica. My name's R. Which personality type would make the best psychologist? I think according to my understanding, I would first like to preface this by saying that I am an INTP. So I do apologize if there are any biases, I guess. So which type do I think would make the best psychologist? So I think I kind of explained this in a previous video, but I think the best psychologists would have intuition and feeling in their function stack. Ultimately, because I think you need the intuition to understand and connect the associations of a given individual. And I also think that it's very important for a psychologist to have empathy. So if I were to create a function stack for the best psychologist, I would I would stack it as such. So introverted intuition as their dominant function or their hero, extroverted feeling as their auxiliary, introverted thinking as their tertiary or their child, with extroverted sensation as the anima animus or the fourth function, their inferior. Um, you don't really I don't necessarily see the practicality in terms of psychology for having or requiring extroverted sensation in the function stack. So if you put those together, the introverted intuition, extroverted feeling, and introverted thinking and extroverted sensation, what you ultimately get is an INFJ. And again, the reason I say this is because introverted intuition is really good at picking up um, the associations for individuals. And then you pair that with extroverted feeling where they have empathy and compassion and are able to essentially feel their way through an individual on different levels to such a great depth. And that also pairs with the introverted intuition that it's able to go to such a depth of understanding the human condition. I think as well in Jungian analysis or dream analysis, the symbols that are um, inherent in dreams that show up in dreams, introverted intuition has a really good instinct about understanding what those symbols mean, not just what they mean, but also what that person may be associating a, a certain feeling with that intuition, with that symbol. And then you have their tertiary function, which is introverted thinking, which can sort of categorize and place a logical framework around the whole thing. Um, Again, I would also preface this by saying that the INFJ would ultimately have to be mature, first of all, enough to understand themselves first, because I think INFJs have a difficult time trying to discern or distinguish between their own feelings and another person's feelings. They tend to, from my experience and observing them, is they tend to absorb the environment like almost instinctually, and it kind of blends with their own feelings. And it's what I understand now is that it's very difficult to sort of separate what is ultimately your own feelings from someone else's. It as an INTP, I have extroverted feeling in my inferior function, my fourth function. So for me, it's very primitive. It's unconscious essentially, which means I have a very difficult time not just expressing my feelings, but understanding what feelings belong to me and what feelings are ultimately someone else's. And whenever I walk into an environment back then when I didn't really understand my extroverted feeling, I had a really difficult time understanding where these feelings came from, but now I understand that sometimes it's not necessarily my own feelings that I'm picking up. It's from the environment. That's what extroverted feeling is. Um, Extroverted feeling is also important because it seeks to harmonize in a group. It's responsible for empathy and compassion as well. Um, like if you had it as an introverted feeling, like an INTJ or maybe an ENFP, that then you would have a difficult, I think, greater difficulty in empathizing with a person because your own personal values supersede the ultimately the other person's values. That's also why INFJs are sometimes coined as the counselors. They're natural therapists in essence, and that's primarily due to the fact of their cognitive function stack of the way things are set up. Their introverted intuition can pick up things people can't see, and then their extroverted feeling allows them to empathize with certain with people that they ultimately would put time and effort into. But again, that only works if the INFJ is mature enough and developed enough, and I would say have more of an assertive personality. Because what ultimately could happen, because they're so naturally inclined towards psychology, is and maybe if they're immature, they don't really understand all these powers that they have, is that they have a tendency to be able to manipulate people very deeply, like sort of in a terrifying way. They have an ability to move the pieces, if you will, like in chess, without the person even knowing, and that's it's dangerous to have that kind of capacity. So if they're immature, they may not even be conscious that they're doing it, but if they're immature, they could easily take advantage of their functions to cause a lot of harm. But that's not necessarily how they're stacked, right? Because they have extroverted feeling. Um, but like if there was a very unhealthy INFJ, they could easily do that. And I've had experience with that because as an INTP, I seem to attract a lot of INFJs into my life. As a matter of fact, my brother is an INFJ, and my best friend is an INFJ, and yeah, and I just have a pretty large circle of INFJs surrounding me, despite the fact that they're the rarest type. I would also say that based on my research and my analysis, INFJs have a proclivity or a natural talent for communicating such abstract things through words, which is extremely difficult when you're dealing with psychology because there's a lot of things that you really can't explain things with words. But the INFJ, particularly female INFJs, have this incredible capacity, talent to express such deep emotions, symbols, feelings, abstract ideas with words. Um, I would say the male INFJ, unless they've developed their anima function, less so. And I'm not sure why. It's just it was based on my research and reading. There are plenty of male INFJs that I have seen that write extremely well, but I do tend to see that there are more female INFJs with that capacity of communicating their thoughts and feelings in such an articulate and beautiful way. It's just yeah, I was even speaking with my INTJ friend, and we were both talking about how why is it that the INFJ writes so well, particularly female INFJs, and it's because they have such a intuitive and deep emotional connection to their psychology, essentially. Um, yeah, and I really think like if the female INFJ or male uh, really integrates their introverted thinking, they have this innate capacity to become very talented psychologists, very dare I say powerful psychologists, and that's due to their function stack. Again, I spoke about this in a previous video to suggest uh, my opinion in that psychology is subjective, not objective. It deals with the human experience, the personal individual experience. Like I mentioned before, that the associations that that person develops over their lifetime, which is both ingrained in their experiences, their their nurture, and their nature, their psychological structure, their psychological makeup, their personality type. And ultimately, if it's a subjective experience, you need to have a good connection with, let's say, a client or a patient on an emotional level, because ultimately that's really what, like I mentioned in the other video, like that's what dreams are about. Taking the symbols to describe the message or the feeling of the dream. Um, Dreams also offer compensation. And so if you have like the TI, the NI, and the FE, or the NIFE and the TI, you could essentially really understand that person to such a deep level. But that's only if the INFJ has done enough work on themselves to understand themselves better, just to be able to sort of distinguish between what is them and what is not them. And this explains why the INFJ needs so much alone time. It's really to sort out their own feelings from the external environment and to introspect on the things that have occurred from their experiences. Um, the INTP does have a very similar stack, but the and this goes for the INTP as well. Like if the INTP is not well integrated with his unconscious function, which is extroverted feeling, they wouldn't make as great as a psychologist, because again, you need a lot of empathy. You need to be able to have a human to human connection with the patient or with the client to really be able to understand. And we do have that FE in our fourth stack. So unless the INTP has developed their fourth function to a degree where they can utilize it practically in their daily life, the introverted thinking usually takes over. Um, and the introverted thinking, although powerful, is not enough to connect with a person, because the person also need, like in Jungian psychology, it's really about the 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 the, the doctor, I would call it the doctor, and the patient going side by side into their unconscious and to understand that person's psychology as equals, not as partners, essentially. And so there's obviously a lot of projection and transference involved, and so it's it's not appropriate if the patient sees that the analyst is above them. That's not how it works. It's about going hand in hand into the patient's unconscious together, sort of as like a guide. And it's also important that and this is where I talked about introverted feeling gets in the way. It's about the patient. It's about the person, the client, because introverted feeling may may project too much onto their client, meaning that there may be too many biases in the analysis. Not saying that it's impossible, just saying that it might be a little bit more difficult for an introverted feeler to empathize with another person to that extent, uh, like in comparison to extroverted feeling. So I think INTPs could possibly make great academic psychologists, like people who are good at understanding theories and like in the clinical sense. But I think that's the problems with modern psychology is we've used too much of our thinking in psychology that we've completely neglected the feeling aspect in psychology, and that's the biggest problem because, like I said, it's subjective. You you can't generalize the terms of a person's psychology. Every psychology is as unique as a fingerprint, although psychology is far more complex than a fingerprint. But that's the analogy I used. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. And if you would like to learn more about analytical psychology, I did develop an application on the App Store that you can download. I have also developed a website where you can reach out to me and have your dreams analyzed and your psychology analyzed as well at www.dreamanalytica.com. Thank you so much for watching.